should be recording, Rosie, now.
Okay, brilliant. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along to this afternoon's webinar for the Community Planning Alliance. It's one I'm very interested in. I don't know anything like enough about, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more. Freeports, special economic zones, AI growth zones, charter cities and forest cities. They're all words you've probably read about. You're all aware, particularly if you follow European Powell, as he is on Twitter, of kind of the enormity and the scale of these proposals across the UK. And so we're very grateful for David, who is European Powell, for joining us today to talk about these issues. David is an artist and a grassroots activist, and he has been researching Freeports and all the other things in great depth for some time. And he'll be telling you all about sort of the risks to land rights, democratic accountability, planning powers, community sovereignty, all sorts of really far-reaching repercussions of these new zones, allocated zones all around the country, and sort of brought to the fore by the Forest City proposal in West Suffolk, East Cambridge, which has popped up recently. So with no further ado, I shall pass over to David. Thank you very much. Oh, and sorry, questions, put them in the chat as we go, and we will deal with those at the end of David's talk. Okay, thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you. It's great to see, there's quite a few people here already caring about what happens to our communities via zoning. So I'm David Powell. I'm here because I truly believe that you as Suffolk residents and also people who are not directly living in Suffolk deserve to hear the full story about Forest City 1. It's called Forest City 1 because there are others in the pipeline. The real details about how actually Forest City would be run, who makes the decisions, who profits, and what that means for you and your villages. So let me be upfront right away. I'm not against building more houses. We all know there's a housing crisis and we need solutions to it. But what worries me, and I think what should worry all of us, is a setup that takes away your say in how things are done, while handing control over to unelected people and private companies. Over the last few weeks, I've been digging into this. I've gone through all Forest City 1's brochures and websites. I've looked at similar projects around the world. And most importantly, I've had direct conversations with one of the co-founders of Forest City 1. He approached me on X, and he wanted to talk about what their project was. So I prepared a bunch of questions for him, and what he said doesn't really match up with the sunny picture they're painting about Forest City 1. So today I'm going to walk you through it step by step. Number one, what are these things called special economic zones? Because Forest City plans to use one, and that really changes everything. Who the key people back in this are, and what they really stand for. What I've been told about it from the co-founder, how the city would be governed, and just in case anyone thinks I'm making this up, I've got all the screenshots from the people involved in the project to prove it. A very similar project in Honduras, which went horribly wrong, got shut down by the Supreme Court. I will go into what happened there, and I will try and identify the kind of patterns that seem to be lining up with Forest City. Over the years, as I've been researching the free zones, SEZs, special economic zones, AI growth zones rollout, newspapers like The Guardian, they keep missing the big questions. So what Forest City 1 really boils down to, based on all of this, based on my research. And finally, what this could mean for Suffolk, for your homes, your land, and your future. So everything I'm sharing comes straight from documents, public statements, the co-founders of the project, and the government, the UK government's website. So there's no guesswork, it's just the facts. So part one, I'm going to tell you what a special economic zone is and why Forest City 1 is dependent on it. You might not heard much about special economic zones, or SEZs for short. Forest City 1 is planning to use one of these, so it's important we understand what they are, because they're not just fancy words, they change how rules work in an entire region. So imagine SEZs are kind of patches on the UK map, where usual UK laws and regulations get relaxed and suspended, in some cases even set aside to make it easier for businesses to make demands. The government creates them to pull in companies by offering perks like businesses paying little or no tax for 10 years. That's called a tax holiday. Skipping a lot of the normal planning rules, so approvals happen faster with fewer checks. Different regulations from the rest of the country, like looser rules on building. Also, this applies to the environment. And even public money handed over to private firms to help them set up shop. The idea the government sells is this will bring jobs and money into the area, but in practice, it's more about giving big companies a leg up, often at the expense of local control. So how many of these zones are there already? There's a lot. Britain has 12 free ports and 74 special economic zones scattered across England, Scotland and Wales, added to which are new AI growth zones. And these are kind of the digital layer of the Freeports and the SEZs. These were launched in January 2025 by Keir Starmer. So there are already 200 bids on AI growth zone sites to date. In June 2025, the Labour government rolled them all together into something called industrial strategy zones. That means in one spot you can stack all these perks on top of each other. Tax breaks plus planning shortcuts plus special rules, and they even have a term for it. It's called zone stacking. So these zones, they're not tiny, they're huge. So if we take the Plymouth and South Devon Freeport, it's inside a massive 74-kilometre circle that covers the whole of Dartmoor National Park. So think about that. A protected national park is now part of a zone where rules are relaxed. So if they can do this to Dartmoor, what's stopping them from doing it everywhere? So closer to home, Suffolk already has its own investment zone along the A14, A12 and A11 roads. The setup for these special rules is already here. So exactly where Forest City wants to build. They're not starting on blank land, they're layering the project on top of an existing zone and asking for even more SEZ powers. Money-wise, each of the SEZs gets 160 million of public money. That's known as state aid. That's public money, so that's per zone. And it doesn't go to you or me, it goes straight to companies as a kind of lure to move them in. I want to give you an example now of what happened at Teesside Freeport, which was Rishi Sunak's flagship Brexit Freeport. It's basically the template for how this deregulated zoning rolls out. Each Freeport started with 25 million in seed capital, but Teesside ended up spending 560 million of taxpayers' money, which is 22 times more. Over 22 times more than the original amount. So where did that extra come from? Well, it comes from the public. So this isn't rare, it's how zones are designed. Public cash flowing to private pockets under the banner of investment and economic growth. Private Eye covered the shenanigans at Teesside in forensic detail. So imagine the example this sets for the other 86 free zones. The zones don't stay small either. They're kind of expansionist. They grow. Government policy says they're not stuck to a fixed line on the map. They grow based on what businesses want, turning into bigger clusters as more companies chase the deals. So how does this tie to Forest City 1? The co-founder told me straight that they're going to go for SEZ status. So his words were, yes, we would seek Canary Wharf style reductions in headline taxes and exemptions from building taxes, etc. Canary Wharf is one of those zones, different rules, very big tax breaks. So why should we care? Because in a normal project, you'd have your local council handling planning. You could object if something didn't sit right. Your elected councillors decide and everyone follows the same UK rules and pays fair taxes. But in an SEZ, an appointed group calls the shots. Objections get brushed away as obstacles of getting in the way of innovation and economic growth. So the rules can be different, and those tax breaks come out of public pockets. Forest City 1 isn't just about houses, it's about creating a privately run area with these exemptions built in. That's not fixing houses, that's changing who runs the show. So some people might say it can't be that bad here, but here's a little caveat from Quinn Slobodian, the historian who wrote an incredible book I advise everyone to read called Crack Up Capitalism, which is exactly focuses on what free zones are. He went to Canary Wharf a couple of years ago when he was researching the book just to take a simple tourist photo. A private security guard came running over and told him photography is banned in these areas. So not because it was sensitive, just because Canary Wharf is privately managed and they make the rules. So no vote, no discussion. That's the same Canary Wharf that Forest City wants to copy with its tax breaks and exemptions. So if you can't even take a picture of your own city without permission, imagine trying to object when the appointed trustees decide something you don't like. Who is backing Forest City? The Guardian, maybe last week, I think, they said they wrote an article, and that was written by Helena Horton. She said Forest City has nearly 800 supporters. I know it's well over 1,000 now, from all over the political map. There's Greens from to right-wing think tanks, and it's made to sound like that's a good thing, that it's kind of balanced. But let's just look at who and why that might be not as reassuring as it seems. It's not about how many people are signed up. It's about who put the plan together and what they really want. The key people behind this are shaping how Forest City would work. So first of all, there's an architect called Patrick Schumacher, who was a signatory on the petition. You can check this all out on Forest City One's website. He's the head of Zaha Hadid Architects. Now, he's called himself an anarcho-capitalist. What is that? It basically means he thinks everything should be privatized. So no government running things, just markets and companies. He's pushed for cities where streets, public spaces, even management are all private. And his past projects, well, he's worked on something called NEOM in Saudi Arabia, where people have been sentenced to death for not moving out. Amnesty International called it a moral mess. He also designed something for a charter city in Honduras called Prospera. And that was a similar setup, and it was funded by billionaires like Peter Thiel. I don't know if you know who he is. He's the head of Palantir. So what got declared unconstitutional, Prospera, I mean, by the Supreme Court, Prospera turned around and said, well, we're now going to sue you because we have an ISDS, investor state dispute settlement clause, written into the contract. So now Prospera are suing the Honduran government for $11 billion, which is 2/3 of their GDP. During that period, locals in Honduras had their water cut off when they said no. Schumacher says public funding for things like housing is wrong, but his architectural firm takes hundreds of millions in taxpayer money for projects like the London Aquatic Centre, which went way over budget. So now he's signed up to Forest City, which wants the public subsidies I mentioned to you earlier. That is a 160 million pot of money via the SEZ status, while advocating that there should be no state help for anybody. So then we've got another signatory, is a man called James Price. So he's an ex-conservative advisor. He's now on the Adam Smith Institute and Centre for Policy Studies. Centre for Policy Studies was set up in 1974 by Margaret Thatcher. These groups have been calling for charter cities privately run places with minimal rules for decades. Another person, Mark Sidwell, is an editor on the online arm of Centre for Policy Cities, which is a website called CapX. So it's part of the same think tank group. He wrote an article in 2020, Let's Build Hong Kong 2.0 here in the UK. It laid out charter cities as crown dependencies with their own laws, their low taxes, no planning hurdles, private control. They even use the same map as Forest City, painting rural areas like they're empty. And you can see that on the website. It's it's an image of the British Isles, and it says something like the yellow areas, which are dotted all over the UK, nobody lives here. There's another person called Fraser Myers who signed the petition. Now he's from Spiked magazine, which has got funding from the Charles Koch Foundation. These are big libertarian donors pushing for less government, more market power. We've also got Ben Pocklington from Revolut. That's a fintech firm known for move fast and break things, dodging rules, which is perfect for SEZs. On the kind of the left-wing side, we've got Dame Patricia Hewitt, a former Labour minister who brings in the new Labour side with public-private deals and marketising services. She gives it a kind of a left-leaning look. So what's going on with this kind of cross-party thing? The Guardian says it's great, but we need to know that people on the Green progressive side think they're signing up for democratic, eco-friendly housing with community control. But the libertarians, the ones who designed this whole thing, they know it's about appointed leaders, SEZ perks and charter city setup. So those two visions, they can't both win, they can't coexist together. The libertarians built the framework, the progressives are just the friendly face. So when someone who wants to privatize everything backs a community project, you have to ask, whose idea is this really? I want to get into what the co-founder of Forest City told me directly. I asked him some pretty tough questions about how this would work, and he answered my messages. Everything is screenshotted, so I've got it all stored. He said that it doesn't line up with the it doesn't line up with the community-led story that Forest City 1 are telling you. So first on who controls the land trust, the bit that's supposed to keep things affordable forever. The materials make it sound like residents run it, but that's not true. And I quote, I quote the co-founder now, when it comes to this trust, no, it will not be left to a board of residents. Trustees are always appointed. He also added that democratic choice often runs counter to long-term interests. So that's him saying straight up that residents voting on things is a bad idea because they might make short-term choices. He talks about the German model where trustees are picked, not elected. So who builds the city? It's not you or the community. And I quote again, a development corporation set up by the government, unelected, top down, like in the big projects that have pushed people out before. On those SEZ powers I mentioned earlier, yes, they'll seek them. And I quote again, Canary Wharf style reductions in taxes and exemptions. That's tax breaks and rule bending for businesses. What's in it for the founders? The answer he gave me was ACDC gets a gift of 80 acres. That's the reward for risking 200 million of private money, unquote. 80 acres in a new city with all these perks, that's worth tens or hundreds of millions once it's built. So what if your village doesn't want in? I asked what happens if 90% vote no. His answer, and I quote again, that's for the current residents and the Secretary of State to decide. So a government minister in London can actually override your objections. When do we see the full legal papers, I asked, the rules on who controls what, and I quote again, 2 to 3 years from now. So they want your support and government to okay first, and then the details later. On mixing all these backers, he said, it's just a very strange mixture of libertarianism and cooperativism, but you really can't mix let markets run free with no rules and community together deciding. It's libertarian bones with a kind of cooperative skin. So when I shared his answers publicly, and by the way, he's also shared them publicly himself, he called me shady and untrustworthy and said I broke a deal, and there was no deal. I asked, he answered, I analyzed. He hasn't denied any quote, he's just attacked me for sharing them. This isn't what a transparent community project should really look like. I'm going to go back now to the Prospera warning to see why this setup rings alarm bells for a City 1. Look at Prospera in Honduras. The same architect, Schumacher, who provided the designs for the zone of economic development, which is the Charter City. Same kind of model, same promises of a bright future. They said it would bring jobs and prosperity, but what happened? Well, they built trust with locals by fixing the water systems. Then they cut off the water to a nearby village when their elected leaders wouldn't sign over rights. So months without water because they wanted to keep control. The Honduran government eventually said it was unconstitutional, a narco regime creation, and they shut it down. And as I said earlier, Prospero's response, they're now suing the Honduran government for 11 billion. So I'm going to mention the guy who came up with this project, the Charter City project. He is a professor called Paul Romer. He teaches at Stanford University. He was also the mentor of Rishi Sunak. Paul Romer actually left the Prospero project after he saw that it was a kind of being twisted into what he said was a libertarian dream without any democracy. So, you know, we've got the same players, we've got the same playbook, promises up front, power grabs later. Honduras said no, Suffolk could be next. So I'm going to say why the Guardian got it wrong. You might wonder why we haven't heard more about this. The Guardian, they ran a big positive piece on Forest City with nice AI renderings, you know, of a city with lots of trees and things like this, affordable prices. They've even got someone on the board, a kind of a green watchdog, but they didn't ask the key questions. Will residents elect the trustees? What SEZ powers do you want? What do the founders get? Can villagers say no? When do we see the legal paperwork? The green watchdog guy on the who is an unpaid advisor on the panel, he's calling himself an independent advocate who would fight for it if needed. The company that's involved are getting 80 acres, so that's not independent, that is invested. Mainstream media often takes the marketing at face value. I asked the hard stuff, I got answers, and then I'm being called out for it. So that's why we really need to keep kind of digging ourselves, you know, in grassroots groups. What Forest City actually is, putting it all together, Forest City matches the Charter City model. So it's about appointed trustees, no votes, SEZ exemptions, which is basically tax dodging and bending the rules. It comes with founder gifts, so 80 acres profit, no village veto, the minister decides, and hidden documents for 3 years. So it's sold as progressive, eco, affordable, but the structure is corporate libertarian control. So what's at stake for Suffolk? I mean, if it goes ahead, you're signing up for optional democracy. There's no veto for villages, permanent corporate say, lost taxes, bypass planning, maybe even services used against you, like in Honduras, critical infrastructure I'm talking about. In Honduras, a woman chose no water over losing control. Suffolk could face the, similar choices. It's important to know that we can build homes democratically, real trust with elections, council housing, without this. I'm not anti-housing, I'm anti-losing our say to appointed boards and SEZs. There are better ways without the demands Forest City makes. Honduras said no. I think Suffolk should also say no to this. That's it. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. And it's funny, isn't it? But the transparency in particular, I was just noting as you went through that, of course, some of the founders are busy blocking people on X if they get challenged. And actually, the journalist who wrote that puff piece in The Guardian, she subsequently blocked me as well, because I was sort of saying to her, why is there no balance in this article? Because normally journalists do present two sides. And it's actually been a major issue with supporters. One of my campaigns is that our opponent always gets to have the last word, because the journalists go to them and say what do they think, which is fine. That's balanced journalism. But so yeah, the sort of smoke and mirrors isn't great. Now in the chat, what other regulations do not apply in these zones? I mean, I'll leave you to interpret whether that's free ports or special economic zones or charter cities, because all three are probably slightly different, aren't they? But yeah, what are sort of other things that we might lose, other powers?
I think it's a whole kind of package of powers that are lost. And I did a recent petition to the government, which got over 10,000 signatures, meaning the government had to respond. And they basically said that they referred to the SEZs, industrial strategy zones. That's the umbrella term now they're using to merge the Tories, Freeports and the SEZs and AI growth zones. There's also university zones and food enterprise zones, and also growth defense zones. So there's a whole load of zoning that's going on. I think the biggest thing, the reason why, and this is also why Brexit happened, it was to take advantage of state aid. Now, there are 82 zones in the EU. They're gradually being dismantled, actually, because of things like human and weapons and drugs trafficking. There's violations on environmental abuse. The biggest one, though, is this using of public money for profit motive. You can look on the EU Commission's website, and it says about state aid and its relationship to SEZs and Freeports. And they said, yeah, the problem is that it disrupts the integrity of the single market. So it makes competition really intense in some areas and other areas not. This is why the zones were strictly regulated, because the EU knew from patterns in history of why zones, I mean, zones go back to like the 1600s with the East India Company. They're a kind of colonial attack on sovereignty. Companies bring their own laws, they bring their own courts, they bring their own workforces, and they bring their own kind of frameworks for how they think entire regions should be governed. But they're all based on extractive approaches. So there's a whole range of those regulations that are relaxed. And so for the government to say that the industrial strategy zones are no different in terms of regulation to the rest of the country, that's an absolute lie. Absolute lie. There would be no, you logically just think about it. What is the point of having a zone if there was no deregulation? I mean, this is one of the big kind of arguments against zoning. You should just be able to do this democratically. Why do you need to go, first of all, hand in millions? I mean, look at Teesside, 560 million of taxpayers' company, where the profits made in Teesside were 9 to 10 in favour of the private sector. Private Eye did an 8-page expose on this called Teesside Stripped. I mean, the other thing that happened with that was that Michael Gove set up an independent audit committee, because the National Audit Office, they wanted to take a look, and but they were shut down by Michael Gove. The same thing happened with Angela Rayner. She shut down a security audit because one of the family members of the Teesside group, his father was in prison for running a cocaine cartel. So, there's both Labour and the Tories been bypassing, the National Audit Office because they know it just looks terrible. So, the feedback from the parliamentary committee that looked into it was, now what are they going to do? They're going to use this as a kind of a warning for the 86 other zones. I mean, it's just absolutely ludicrous. So this was the whole point for Brexit. Brexit is, I mean, even the word Brexit, exit, is about exiting democracy. I mean, I started digging into this just after Brexit. I dug into it because I was denied a vote on Brexit, as were millions of people who were not living in the UK. But of course, I can vote in the elections in the UK. I can vote on referendums and things like this. So when I rang up my local council, they said, yeah, by the time we process your vote, the deadline for the referendum will be over. That got me really angry. Yeah. And I just sort of had to push past what the kind of the glossy brochure of Brexit was, patriotism, taking back control. But really, it's about taking back control for, these elites and these basically these oligarchs and millionaires who feel that they can do democracy better. So while they're quite happy to take billions in public money for these outlandish projects, of which there's a track record of them completely collapsing and failing, of destabilizing, of replacing collective sovereignty, which is people power, with corporate sovereignty. So that's your regulatory, the risks of what's involved when you suddenly hand over governance powers under the kind of nebulous dictums of localized governance.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, zones they're talked about as being kind of patchworks, and it is a patchwork because what they're doing is they take the problem of big governance and they break it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. So that's why they start small with a free port. And a free port, actually, that's privatization is already embedded in that label. A port is publicly owned and a free port is privately owned. So the next thing you do is you build around that, and that's what the special economic zone is. That's why I make the reference to Plymouth Freeport and Dartmoor. So they're these zones from a free port to a special economic zone, and then the added layer of the AI growth zone. They're all expansionist by their very nature. So you're going to have, I mean, Richard Murphy also wrote some really good stuff about this kind of expansionist, aggressive corporate political expansionist motives of free ports and those behind them. First of all, extract all the public money, extract minerals like lithium, and Dartmoor is I mean, the US Geological Survey Foundation, they found that lithium is one of the highest concentrations in Dartmoor. Now, the Dartmoor National Park people, they had they weren't even consulted that there was a special economic zone being set up there. So, for a place like Suffolk, you've already got the kind of foundations for the city to go ahead under what I think is a kind of greenwashing, bullshit proposal.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as though the people you're talking about are they're taking a pretend paternalistic, this is good for everybody approach, and this is generic, not necessarily just the forest city, but maybe even making themselves believe they're doing things for the right reasons. Whereas also, yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary, this sort of transfer to the private sector. And it's extraordinary that the politician thinks it's a good idea, because clearly that's reducing their tax take. And as we know, we're desperate for tax. So that sort of brings me to a question from Caroline about the very influential people that must be behind these things. And what is it? Is it corporate? Is it political lobbying? Is it donations? And what could the generic we, do to sort of counter some of these zones and these changes?
Well, like I said, you've got a great example. Sorry, my flu recovery is coming through. You've got the great example of Prospera charter city in Honduras that was eventually shut down by the Supreme Court. But that was due to local people getting together, seeing what was happening to critical infrastructure, being completely their rights taken away. It was actually called a violation of people's sovereignty, which is one of the main reasons it was shut down. What can I say? I mean, the political ideology, it gets actually very dark. There is something, Peter Thiel of Palantir, that's a corporation that is using the same kind of software for the drones in Gaza, right? And Peter Thiel's Palantir now, that there's a UK branch of Palantir. The head of the UK branch is a man called Lewis Mosley. He's the grandson of British fascist Oswald Mosley. So Palantir have 24 contracts in key UK public institutions. That is the NHS, the police forces, the Cabinet Office, the Ministry of Defence, the Department of Levelling Up and Housing Commission. That's really very significant. And they've started it with also councils. So there's Coventry City Council, right? They've been given a contract with Palantir. Three-quarters of the police forces who've got the contracts with Palantir deny or won't even reveal details of the facial recognition systems and things like this. Digital ID is really bound up with zoning. So it goes back, of course, you can link it back in history to, I said earlier, 1600 and the East India Company. I believe London City got its charter in 1075. So that's why you have, until this day, the City of London, where businesses can vote, entire businesses can vote. So this kind of zoning, it's taken on a new dimension after the 2008 crash. Apparently thousands and thousands of zones kind of quickly sprang up because they began to see what the problem was. You know, companies will get bailed out by the public, you know, after a crash, something like this. And then you have these companies who give so much money to politicians, direct donations, the think tanks that are supported by fossil fuel industries, Charles Koch. I mean, you've got BlackRock and Blackstone. BlackRock, incidentally, they've got 80% stakes in 3 British freeports. That's Harwich, Felixstowe, and Thamesport. So it also links into Trump's tariff attacks across the world. So you have to think now, if those zones are exempt from things like tariffs, right? If they're exempt from, you know, if they hire their own private security services as well. I mean, everything is geared towards kind of obfuscation and just covering up things that are going on. And that's the whole problem with Freeports. And that's the whole problem with corporations and oligarchs trying to tell us that, you know, our democracy is broken and failed, but they're the ones who think they can fix it. But they only want to fix it by extracting public wealth in order to do it. But then what they want to put in place is it's authoritarianism, right?
Yeah, no, it's quite frightening, really, isn't it? And the scale
It's
of it.
terrifying.
So I mean, Marge, do you want to ask something? I know you have a question. Do you want to? I can see your microphone's off. Maybe not. Okay, come back to Marge. I'm going through the questions in no order. I mean, this is an interesting one. So do you know of any MPs of whatever party who understand the perils of charter cities and similar? And if so, can they be lobbied? Have you got sort of MPs you deal with who are on top of this?
Okay, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana and your party, Zach Palensky and the Green Party, 100% against free zones and free ports. Okay. You can see I've posted, I mean, if you start checking out my Substack and my X account and my Blue Sky, I've been doing this for several years now. And there's videos of Corbyn, and there's, you know, on the Green Party's website, they have a section about special economic zones and why they are against them. Pretty much what I've been telling you guys, those are the reasons why. So you have to think that I have a little story, actually. It's about immediately after Brexit, when Sunak and Liz Truss was the one who sort of started announcing full fat investment zones. So Sunak kind of went along with it, and Jeremy Hunt also, you know, went along with it, of course. These zones really popped up immediately after Brexit. The reason why Thatcher's like Canary Wharf and things like this, they didn't amount to what they were on paper, what they would do. First of all, you've got job displacement, and you can read all this on the government website, why the SEZs and free zones failed under Margaret Thatcher and why they were winding them down. I mean, in terribly underwhelming results. Job displacement is when people come from one region and they go to another looking for better work and better livelihoods and things. But that has a kind of a chain effect where, you know, people leaving one city, that city falls into further disrepair. Whereas, you know, the so-called dividends that are told in the glossy brochures about free zones, they actually only come into fruition for the companies. So a lot of the jobs that were displaced were actually low-skilled jobs as well. So when Brexit came along, it was the perfect opportunity to take full advantage of this, you know, the lack of state aid rules now that the EU said you can't do this because it's about building communities. It's not about giving profits to corporations who are going to shape, you know, basically a kind of authoritarian state or authoritarian pockets of regions across an entire continent. It's not on. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, it's very interesting what you're saying about sort of the potential to suck the investment out of the
Yeah.
wider area, because already the co-founder of Forest City has said to me, in an attempt to sell the concept, how would you like it if I stopped all house building across the rest of East Anglia, as though that's a good thing. But that immediately, that hoovers everything into that new Forest City and takes away any potential growth in the rest
Yeah.
of the region that people might want. And then it's all within the SEZ, whatever the kind of development corporation. So you can see already that's a concept that they've got in mind.
Can I
You might
just
like,
add
go
one
on.
thing that,
Yeah.
sorry, I forgot to mention that, I mean, this is such a kind of complex state of affairs, is that when Sunak and Truss rolled out those zones immediately after Brexit, Labour MPs, councillors, mayors, including Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham, they signed off on these. There's one in Manchester, there's one in Liverpool. They were on the same boards, the same committee boards, and I've got the screenshots of that, of people like Michael Gove and advocates for the corporations. I mean, we're really talking like JCB and all these people. They signed off on them behind the headlines, behind closed doors, and publicly. Keir Starmer said Freeports were not a silver bullet for the economy, but they signed off on them. And where are we now? Well, Starmer's turbocharging. First of all, he's trying to kind of rebrand the Tories' Freeports and SEZs by putting them under an umbrella term of industrial strategy zones. There's a web page on the government's website called Industrial Strategy Zones Action Plan, which is quite a mouthful. Maybe I've caught glimpses of Rachel Reeves saying in industrial strategy. They never use the word zones. So it's really clear they're just trying to cover the tracks of collusion they had with the Tories. Now they're trying to, rebrand them and push them forward as something called industrial strategy zones. At some point, they are admitting they are zones.
Yeah.
But they're still doing what all the kind of Freeport entities, SEZ entities and councils, if you start looking on their website, it's all about growth and innovation, but they're really not telling you about the regulatory, or what I call the deregulatory infrastructure. So that's really problematic.
Yeah.
And we've got the prime examples of the flagship Brexit Freeport Teesside, where it went completely wrong.
Yeah, so you'd sort of think it'd be nice to learn from an example, wouldn't you? You've got a great case study sitting there at home,
Absolutely,
but as usual, won't learn from it. I mean, this is slightly separate. They Starmer said on Monday in the Fingleton review, which is the nuclear review, that he would be wanting the business secretary to adopt all the recommendations across business. So I'm assuming a lot of those would be easier to adopt in zones than they would be in the wider world. So there's everything from the habitats regulations to national parks protections to the caps on the Aarhus Convention for legal challenges being raised, all sorts of stuff. So you can see exactly what they're trying to do, and you can see it applying more in the zones. So this, I think you might think is interesting. Well, why are we not seeing more about this in the press?
Yeah. Okay. So what happened with the initial policy was it was rubber stamped with primary legislation, and that was quickly followed by secondary legislation. So the difference between primary legislation and secondary legislation is there is no parliamentary debate on the policy. The public are not consulted, and the press are not notified. So this is what really drove me to try and dig into what was going on. And I've submitted loads of FOIs. I mean, I'm not the only person doing that. There are a couple of other activists who are doing that. And I've seen documents where the FOIs are just completely redacted. The replies I've personally got, my questions are very detailed when I ask them, and they say, oh, it's too detailed, we can't do that. It's going to cost 600 quid per question, which they would pay, but they say we don't have the time to look at this, right? I mean, we're really talking about the whole country being reconfigured, in a transition. This is what we're all living through now, is the transition phase to a zonified, privatized country. If they're going to privatize everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it's funny. It's the opposite of what you'd expect from a Labour government in a way, isn't it? But which is why it's interesting if you say that sort of Corbyn and Polanski are aware of these risks. And Caroline's put the full Freeport map link into the chat, so people can have a look at that and see. I mean, even the local aim, the Suffolk one is enormous in particular. So. Or local to me anyway. Yeah, and Maud just said it's absolutely right. If the Labour MPs don't toe the line, they lose the whip. We saw that last night with the night before with the farming votes. Another one lost the whip. We saw it before with environmental rebellions. So if they're worried about their career, they don't stand up. Probably it's also really, really complicated, isn't it? Special economic zones, Freeports, charter cities. The rules are complex. It's hard to get across in an interesting way in the news. That news like sort of catchy headlines. So
and I mean, I think of it like this: the complexity of these zones is actually it's camouflage, and they've really found very intriguing ways to kind of not release, commercially sensitive information. But we're really talking about the more that councils get merged, the more that the local councils, the parish councils, get squeezed out. So they no longer have a voice in what is going to be happening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, another important thing, there's a man called Shankar Singham. I don't know if anyone's heard of Shankar Singham. Well, he's known as the architect of Brexit. Shankar Singham, he's a US trade lawyer, but I think he grew up in the UK. He does have a kind of British accent, but he developed what he calls the regulatory structure for Freeports and free zones at Babson College in the US. Right, they even devoted a special wing for him to do this. Now he was on the phone basically with Michael Gove, on a daily basis during the whole referendum period, convincing him that what will come in will be this whole patchwork of zones. And I've made the deregulatory structure. You'll call it regulatory. It's not. It's a deregulatory structure. And Shankar Singham now apparently he's the growth treasury advisor for the Labour government now.
Oh, wow.
I saw this a few days ago. Someone made a post about it. I think it was Liz Webster.
Okay, well that's quite telling then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're being told, or campaigners are being told, that if we object to Forest City 1, it's tantamount to increasing the housing crisis and making the future youth even more homeless than they are allegedly now. So how do we counter this position? Someone has put an answer to that in the chat.
I think that's a kind of a false choice, because you can build housing without appointed trustees and these SEZ exemptions. Just make them democratic, right? I mean, it's not about giving pocketfuls of public money to corporations who, if you look at what happened with Grenfell, right, who will probably cut corners and also pollute the land with toxic waste from the building process. I mean, I think it's very symptomatic that you start to see these kind of AI renderings of these perfect cities and things, and then you just start to dig behind the scenes, and either you're going to get, I mean, you can look at a documentary on Prospera, and it's pretty fancy buildings and things like this. But as I said, it's actually been shut down now and is being contested by, the Supreme Court, even though the thing we would need to find out about Forest City 1 and all the others, if they do go ahead, if there is an investor state dispute settlement clause written into it. If that is the case, ISDS means the government cannot breach the contract, and those contracts, by the way, in all the zones are 25 years long. That's another reason why this rejoining the EU is impossible.
Yeah.
The investor state dispute settlement has an equivalent in London called the London Court of International Arbitration. So the FOIs I've been sending have been trying to I know in Scotland they don't have the LCIA equivalent. That means they've got a get out clause. There's 18 SEZs in Scotland and 2 Freeports. There's 8 SEZs in Wales and 2 Freeports in Wales, but 48 SEZs and 8 Freeports in England. So it's just really important to know who is behind it, who are the kind of, the makers and the shakers, who are, and they're very quiet. They really work in the shadows.
Yeah.
So, you've just got to keep pushing. You've got to dig. You've got to expose what is going on, because the more that this is ignored, the more we're going to get more of these articles from The Guardian saying everything is fine when it's absolutely not.
Yeah. And that, I mean, yeah, I suppose if we're being charitable, we could say that maybe one or two of the founders do have maybe the best interest of, I don't know, the young at heart. Let's be charitable. But if they are getting sucked into a system they don't fully understand, then things will happen that are beyond their control. So it's kind of potentially they have to. They are at a risk of being found to be naive potentially as well, aren't they? So
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, then I've got one. Marge, you might have to speak on this. What evidence do they have to make available? We know there's only one housing crisis, that's the lack of social housing. I think most of us agree with that. But what evidence did you mean? Can you speak, or is your network?
Yeah, I can. You should. Can you hear me?
got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they're suggesting that they have to do this to prevent young people from ending up on homeless or what have you, then we should be demanding evidence that these zones are needed, because it's not just the housing element, it's also the employment. I mean, Teesside said that they would provide thousands of jobs. Who's monitoring, and where's the evidence that shows that those jobs have been provided for the 560 million? And the reason that I say this is important is that locally, we have a situation where there's going to be 5,000 houses and 350,000 square meters of employment space on a peat moss, a 335 hectare peat moss. Now, what they've said as justification for this is that there's going to be thousands of new jobs. But one new tenant to the warehousing that's moved in brought all their staff from another area. So basically, they're not new jobs. There's not a single new job was created by that particular tenant. They were all people that now travel 20 miles to get to their new employment place. And then another development is actually a battery energy storage system, which doesn't create a single local job. So where is the evidence that 560 million brings new jobs in Teesside? Where is the evidence that we need all these new homes? Because we know that there's only one housing crisis, which is the lack of social housing. So, they're actually spending 560 million of our money on something that they've got. Well, unless they can show that they've got evidence, I certainly haven't seen any evidence that it's going to deliver 560 million pounds worth of benefits.
No, and it didn't. And you've only got to look at the private eyes following the Teesside scandal of, I mean, it's basically a Ponzi scheme. What is going on there? And like I said, that will repeat across all the other zones. The thing with Scotland and Wales is that they were under no obligation to take part in the zoning, the rollout of the zones, because they devolved governments, and yet they did. So in 2023, I was asked by Cymru, Bylines Cymru, to write an article, and you can go to you just type in Google Freeports Gazette, and there's 10 articles in there on why Freeports in Wales and free zones in Wales are also going to be catastrophic. There's apparently 8 data centers now planned for Wales. So I think Wales is going to be a kind of testing ground for these. I mean, you know about the volumes of water these things use to cool them down. They cannot use seawater because salt is corrosive. The electricity thing, I mean, it's like the amount of electricity used from the grid to charge to maintain one of these data centers is akin to, like, you know, an entire town consumption. And I think it was a few weeks ago, Labour, they tried to say that they were what is it? 90% of businesses who were going to be, what was it about electricity or something, that they didn't have to pay 90% of the bill. So just think about where those bills, who's going to pay for that? And the same thing has been happening in Memphis with Elon Musk's data center. There's a documentary you can watch about that, where they went around a couple of local people who were, in proximity. You could see the data center from their windows. And the first thing the camera people did was they just made everyone be quiet. And because the residents were like, listen to this. And you could just hear this humming, right? That humming continues throughout the entire night. Then they showed you a lake where the water had been drained to almost nothing to cool down the data center. Then a lot of people in the area were complaining of headaches, of asthma. They couldn't sleep properly. And also that people who just moved there, they can no longer sell their houses anymore. They're basically trapped inside that special economic zone where Elon Musk's data center is sucking and extracting everything out of the environment.
Yeah.
And getting people to pay for it. Their bills shot up as well for electricity and water.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, isn't it? It's the speed at which it's happening. It's kind of Wild West, isn't it, at the moment?
I mean, yeah, it is. And it's this kind of blind embrace of what's people like Starmer are calling the AI revolution. And you only have to start, just read a couple of books. There's a great one called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. There's another one called The Last Economy by, I think it's Edmund Mostak. Go through the YouTube channels, because there's loads of activists out there who are, and also a lot of young people too, who are really digging into what this kind of AI boom is, but also that the AI bubble is set to burst within the next, 6 quarters or something like this.
Yeah.
It's just
government's desperate for growth, aren't they? So they're literally choosing any horse in a panic, really. But now look, we've got 4 minutes left and 2 questions, so I don't know if you can do them quite quickly. One you've touched on already. It's sort of following on from. Do you see any connections between the government enforcement of digital identity, involvement of US corporations like BlackRock, Oracle, and Palantir and their founders, and how charter cities could be run, controlling residents using these systems? So that's quite a big question for a short answer, but.
Yeah, there's absolutely a question, a correlation between all those things. And the question is really, it sounds very dense, but the simple answer is absolutely yes. I mean, just look at the kind of how Palantir have been allowed to infiltrate the UK government. I told you about the UK branch, 24 contracts. The 24th contract was, I think, in June this year, with Keir Starmer handing it over to Coventry City Council. That's where Zara Sultana is that's her constituency. She actually did a post where she was objecting to the, Palantir, the contract, which was, I'm trying to remember if it was a couple of $100 million, I think, something staggering, something outrageous, for basically, data surveillance of just about everybody and everything. So the whole digital ID thing, the big difference between digital ID rollout in the UK and the digital ID rollout in the EU, I live in the EU, is that citizens' protections are absolutely embedded in the digital ID rollout in the EU. But the UK and the US governments, they both decided they refused to sign up for the EU's AI Safety Summit. I think it was in April earlier this year. You had JD Vance stepping in saying, yeah, well, that's all woke regulation. That's his excuse, right?
Yeah.
So you've just got to wonder. And then, of course, Keir Starmer is the first, little lapdog to just kind of tally along with whatever JD Vance and Trump say, because they've got people like BlackRock. BlackRock also announced this kind of AI revolution, and they have big interest. They have a big footprint coming into that. It's all Silicon Valley. It's all the oligarchs, it's all basically harvesting every single move, every single thing you do, just in first of all to surveil you, to see what you're doing, that you're not getting up to any, no good or whatever. But it really is about tailoring what you look and what you read and how every click you make to basically tailor new products for you to consume. That's
Yeah.
what it's all about.
Yeah, true. It's very true.
And that I would say finally that the AI growth zones, that's basically the digital layer whereas you have the environment, whereas you have the housing sector, these are kind of the physical layers. The AI growth zone and the digital ID thing is the digital deregulated layer.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, yeah, it's very interesting. There's a consultation running now, isn't there, on facial recognition? So if you like being ignored in government consultations, then you can all submit something to that. So I would actually, there is a final last question I'll give you right at the end to sum up quickly. But Fiona recalls reading the houses proposed in Forest City 1 can only be sold back to the company. Residents do not own the land. Does that mean essentially they're leased and not owned?
Say the last bit again.
Does that mean the houses are essentially leased and not owned because of the model that they're being? It's the community land trust model. So the land is going to be owned forever by the corporation.
Yeah.
And you will own essentially. I mean, I think that's right. Is the answer to that question? Yes. You never own
Yeah,
your.
I guess so. And I mean, I don't know if people are aware that in 2024 in November, the Labour government published a 192-page document on compulsory purchase orders. To sum it up, compulsory purchase orders, this is word for word from the government website, apply to business, agricultural and residential properties, right? So if you look at the case of Birmingham, where there are 6 SEZs there's a Guardian article about this, 6,000 tenants are set to lose their homes, to be demolished via a mass compulsory purchase order. I think there's also mass CPOs happening in Cornwall. And I think, again, they're just the beginnings of patterns of mass CPOs. Doesn't matter if you own your house, if you have a mortgage, if you rent, it doesn't matter. If they want your house, your land to build on for this whole new housing boom, they're going to take it. And they're doing that.
Yeah, no, you're right. They've been tweaking.
And you will not get the hope value. You'll get far less than the hope value on the purchase.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not me saying that. You can look on the government.
No, that's fact. They've changed through the Levelling Up Act and through the Planning Infrastructure Bill. They are making tweaks, as you say. They've removed hope value for most situations. So,
yeah.
Yeah. And then to go out on, this is a good one. How real is Forest City 1, the notion? Is it a real threat or is it just a monstrous piece of kite flying?
I think it's a significant threat. I believe that what it is the end game of the free zone, that a Freeport, an SEZ, an AI growth zone, and then a charter city. It's like stepping stones, right? They're all based on expanding until you've got an entire region and an entire city. So, I mean, I may seem to be a kind of a lone figure out there talking about these things, and but I've really been talking a lot across the UK at grassroots meetings in Scotland, in Liverpool, I mean, in England, in London, also online in Wales and things like that, everywhere. And basically what I've been telling you now is the latest incarnation of that expansion. It's the end game. Charter cities. And Forest City, I mean, even the name is some kind of benign, sort of lovely sounding utopian dream.
Yeah.
One is absolutely not. There was a Forest City actually of the same name in Malaysia that was set up, and it's just completely collapsed now, all due down to corruption and basic, tax evasion and extraction of public wealth for private gain and not delivering on the promises that were initiated. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. It's all happening at once, isn't it? And it's
and very fast.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay. Well, look, I mean, I for one found that super interesting. Thank you so much. And I really enjoy your Twitter feed as well. It's always illuminating. So I really appreciate your time talking to us. I think we'll get a lot more views on YouTube when it goes out, because it's been a sort of middle of the day thing today, which is a bit tricky for people to get to. But yeah, and thank you for coming after having had the flu as well, and your voice held up. So that's good.
I held up just about. I want to say thank you so much for having me, and we've got to keep track on this. Okay.
Definitely. Agree. There's so many issues, aren't there?
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.